Hi guys, it's Ray here from City Fan TV, and in the house today we've got finance expert, finance guru, Colin Savage. How you doing, Colin?
I'm doing great, thanks, Ray.
Fantastic.
We're
here.
Cooler than you, though, by the looks of things.
Sorry?
It's a bit cooler here.
Yeah, where I am, it's been about 30, 32 degrees. Unfortunately, a little bit of shade at the moment. It's a bit cooler today. But it's a bit, I've got a bit of a tan myself on the old ball bonds. We're here to talk about Jurgen Klopp. Now, Jurgen Klopp is a very mild-mannered, unassuming kind of guy, who keeps his thoughts to himself. Don't you think, Colin?
Oh, exactly, yeah. I mean, you never know what Jurgen Klopp's thinking. And, of course, he would never, even if he does say anything, he would never club. It's not within his psyche, is it?
Well, Jurgen Klopp, I mean, obviously we've just been a little bit sarcastic there. Jurgen Klopp, as usual, he's been asked questions and he's always got something to say. And it is a bit disappointing. You'd like to think people don't want to talk about other clubs. But Jurgen Klopp, even though he doesn't like talking about other clubs, he seems to talk about other clubs. Now, a lot of Liverpool fans are very unhappy at the moment because they're not spending money. They're not spending big money buying new players. It didn't harm them last season when they won the title. But the fans are up in arms because apparently it means more to them, and they have some sort of this mentality, this cultish mentality that they deserve it. They deserve to be spending big money, winning all the big prizes, and personally, I think they should be glad they won the league title last year and be happy with that, and to keep challenging this season. Now, Jurgen's had a pop because Chelsea have spent north of 200 million quid this window on some fantastic talent by the looks of things. City haven't spent big. We spent about 60 million quid so far. We might spend on Koulibaly. We were talking about potentially getting Messi as well. And that would have obviously cost a lot of money. And Mr. Klopp, he said, and some of the things I agree with, and some I think he's gone a little bit too far. So he said, for some clubs, it seems less important how uncertain the future is. Okay, he had a pretty straightforward kick in the guts at Chelsea and an implicit criticism of City. He said, owned by countries, owned by oligarchs. That's the truth. We are a different kind of club. We got to the Champions League final 2 years ago. We won it last year. We became Premier League champions last season by being the club we are. We cannot change it overnight and say, now we want to behave like Chelsea. I think that's a bit rude about Chelsea and City. Talking about being owned by countries and he's having a pop at City there, which we all know is wrong. And he spent a lot of money in his time at Liverpool when he said he wouldn't, but then he had to because that's what it takes. So what's your feeling on Klopp and his comments about Chelsea and City?
Well, he's getting his excuses in early, I guess. You get the impression listening to him that Liverpool are owned by, the local butcher, or, the local car dealer, and their team consisted of orphans they'd recruited from the orphans of Fazakerley and Walton. But, and Liverpool fans, of course, lap that sort of thing up, don't they? They think, as you say, the club is somehow different, but it's not different. It's no different. We can perhaps separate City and Chelsea a little bit. Liverpool are owned by billionaires. Tom Werner, John Henry, all the other people involved with FSG are billionaires in their own right. Now, maybe not Sheikh Mansour standard, maybe not even Roman Abramovich standard, but still very wealthy people. And I've got to say, I've a certain degree, a large degree of admiration for the way FSG have run Liverpool. They've put cash in, which more than the Glazers have to United. They put a fair amount of cash in, not Sheikh Mansour type levels of cash, but they put a fair amount of cash in. They've run the club quite cleverly. They get a decent return on that cash. They've made sure that what they spend is generally quite effective. They get the money from the same source that we get our money. And there's a belief that somehow Sheikh Mansour underwrites everything we do. Well, he doesn't, because he hasn't put any money into the club now for quite a while. So everything we spend, we earn through the same channels that Liverpool earn their money. So that's media income from both the Premier League and the Champions League, It's ticket money, which they get more than us, about 20 million quid a year more than us. And there's commercial money, where we're ahead of them. And interestingly, last year, the year to 2019, their revenue, having won the Champions League, was very similar to ours, around the 535 million mark. So in terms of revenue, absolutely no difference. In terms of expenses, theirs were actually slightly lower than ours. Actually, not quite. They do their accounts slightly differently. So I'm just looking at it a slightly different way. But basically, their income covered their expenses, and anything they made on sales of players was a bonus. And it was exactly the same for us. In fact, their operating income was just about break-even level. Ours, we were about just over 20 million quid loss. So again, you're looking at two clubs which had very, very similar revenue and expenditure streams. Not identical, but very, very similar. Now you've got to look at cash flow. So what's most important when you're looking at transfer spending is how much cash do you have? So if you think about it in terms of when you get your wages and you pay your mortgage, you pay your council tax, you pay your gas and electricity, you pay everything else, all your other expenses, what have you got left at the end of the month? And if you manage your finances well, you've got some money left at the end of the month. If you don't manage your finances well, you build up your credit card debt and your overdraft. Now, we've been lucky. In the early days of Sheikh Mansour's ownership, we were reliant on his credit card, basically, effectively, to pay our bills, because we couldn't fund our transfer spending from our income. But because he's funded that transfer spending, we've been more successful as a club. That's enabled us to increase our commercial income, and particularly our media income from the Champions League, which was not a source of income that we had before it came along. So it's about how you manage your cash as well. And it's very difficult to compare like with like, because Liverpool and City don't, in the accounts we produce something called a cash flow statement. And it strips out any items that are not cash. So we'll talk about amortization of player transfer fees. That's not cash. Depreciation of assets is not cash. So you've got to strip all those items out to understand the cash position. So from what I can see, Liverpool and City take a slightly different approach to doing their cash flow statements. And the cash flow statement is in many ways the most interesting one, because that tells you how much cash you've got available to spend when you paid all your cash expenses. So you've got all this income in, you paid wages, you paid operating expenses, you paid all the other cash expenses you've got to pay. How much cash have you got left? Because that determines how much you can spend. So Liverpool and City seem to do the cash flow statement slightly differently. In fact, City don't do one because we're owned by CFG. CFG do one, but you can make a guess. Make a guess at what City generated. So again, there's not a great deal of difference. Liverpool generated about £130 million of cash. City probably generated, from a CFG point of view, £154 million worth of cash. City probably generated a fair chunk of that, well, more than that, because I think a lot of the other CFG operations eat cash. So they don't actually generate any free cash. So it's possible that City generated, I don't know, maybe up to £200 million worth of cash in their own right, which is money they've got to spend. And both chose to spend that on players. So the total of CFG spending was just under 165 million. Liverpool spent 173 million. So Klopp is talking nonsense. You know, the figures at both clubs are very in the same orders of magnitude, if not identical in some cases. So he's talking nonsense, basically. You know, we operate on the same level as he does. The flows of cash are very similar. You know, if they choose not to spend it, that's their business.
Absolutely, and I mean, obviously Chelsea is slightly different, where Roman Abramovich does put money in. He does lend Chelsea money. I think it's an interest-free loan. That's a different, obviously, funding concept. And people do complain that Chelsea spent over £200 million this summer, and it is an eye-popping amount. But can you briefly explain how you can spend 200 million? We've talked about these issues before. But how can you spend, let's say, 200, even 250 million by the time they finish, because they're still looking at more players? They might even get to 300 million. How can you do that and not have an issue with financial fair play?
Well, if you look at it, there's two issues here. One is, do you have the cash? And as we've seen, Roman Abramovich will fund their cash. But you're still going to meet financial fair play. And people see, they sort of spend 200 and something million in the summer of 2017. They see Chelsea spend 250 million now. And what they don't see is, transfer activity is a bit like an iceberg. Everyone sees the spend, and some people look at net spend, but they don't see the other stuff. So let's take an example. I don't know Chelsea's financial position in great detail, but you don't put that 250 million through the accounts in one go. You split it up, you amortize it. I think we're going to talk about this in another video, so I won't stress the point here. But that 250 million will cost them £50 million a year. But you've got to look at the other side of things. So I say, let's take our 2017 summer dealings, where we bought Bernardo Silva, we bought Edison, we bought Kyle Walker, we bought Mendy, we bought Danilo, and we also bought Douglas Luiz, who is now at Villa. So that was about £220 million worth of spending. And everyone looked at City and said, how can they spend so much money and still meet financial fair play? Well, how we could spend it was, the other side, the bit of the iceberg that's under the water, was we released 5 players who came to the end of the contract: Willy Caballero, Bakary Sagna, Pablo Zabaleta, Gael Clichy, and the legend Jesus Navas. And by releasing all those players, you release the wages. And particularly Navas was at the end of his first 5-year contract, so that saved us about £5 million in amortisation. So by releasing all those players, we basically saved the equivalent of £27 million over a season. And that all goes towards the new players. We also sold about a dozen players. So Kolarov, Fernando, Aaron Moy, we talked about, Nolito, Kelechi Iheanacho. We sold to Leicester for 25 million, who cost us virtually nothing. Enes Unal, Zuccolini, and a few other players, Samir Nasri, Wilfred Bonney, Jadon Sancho. The vast majority of those we made a profit on. The only ones we didn't were, I think, Nolito and Nasri, and Wilfred Bonney. We more or less got our money back. But we made a profit of 60 million on those sales. And again, it's wages off the books. So it was about 25 million estimate wages off the books, and another 13 million in amortization. So you're talking about nearly 40 million in wages and amortization save, and 60 million in profit. So you add all those in together, you're talking about 100 million boost. Add that to the 27 million from the 5 players we released. You've released 125 million. So people think, well, that's net spend, but it's not net spend, because that 220 million we spent actually goes through the accounts at 44 million a year, 45 million a year. The wages on those, I think, were maybe about 25 million, let's say 30 million. So again, you're talking about 75 million annual cost. But you've made 100 million, either say in savings or profit or saving out amortization. And when I added all these figures together, my figures may not be accurate because I don't know what people earn. I don't know exactly what the fees were. But when I added everything together, I found that just in terms of saving of wages and amortization, that balanced out the wages and amortization on the new players. Plus, you've got about 60 million profit which is the icing on the cake. So all the people complaining about us spending 220 million that summer 2017, what they didn't see was the wages that was actually, if you look at player costs in terms of wages and amortization, the net spend was actually zero. Plus, we got 60 million in profit. It was a good summer.
The thing is, I mean, it would blow their minds. It would blow their minds to think we spent 220 million quid, and actually, in our accounts, we came out in the positive. It wasn't 200.
I think, these were my guesses. Yeah. I think when the accounts came out, it cost us about £7 million more than the year before. So we got £220 million worth of players for basically £8 million a year.
Yeah, and that's why I start Twitter arguments. I don't start them. I have conversations with people, and people just rubbish the finances, and they want to talk about net spend. They want to talk about things that are actually not relevant. They talk about things that they can understand, but you've got to get behind them. You've got to get deeper. You've got to be able to understand things like we've discussed before. Timing. Why are you selling this player now at slight undervalue? Why do you need that cash flow? And why are you selling somebody to make sure you get a profit in the accounts make, and all these things.
We talked about that, the 10 million, the 18 million profit on sale of these younger players, we might well need them to fund another, Awar. Yeah. I know Michael always tells us off pronouncing it properly, or even Messi, but I'm still not convinced that saga's not quite done. But that sum, a 10 million, an 18 million, 28 million, that buys you when you multiply that up by 5, you're talking about potentially £140 million player. So selling someone for 10 million profit and 18 million profit, actually you can buy £100 million player and play him and pay him a reasonable amount.
I mean, to finish, I'll give
only for 1 year, Mike.
Yeah, that was going to be my point.
That every year, but
I was going to give Garcia as an example, and if we were to sell him for, let's say, £15 million, which fans are unhappy about, but if you get a new player in, let's say, for argument's sake, say the wages are the same, the incoming and the outgoing player, you fund that his amortization. If he's on a 5-year contract, it's 5 times 15, which is 75 million. If he's on a 6-year contract, you could spend 90 million on a player, so long as you've got the cash flow to do that, and so long as every year you make a Garcia type profit on a player of 50 million quid. And I've got to stress again, you've got to at least try and make an attempt. Football fans have got to try and make an attempt to understand the finances behind football, and listening to people like Kieran Maguire, listening to people like you, they can start to do that. And when once you understand a little bit better, then their arguments carry a little bit more weight, and then they'll forget it. Hopefully, they'll forget about net spend. But I suspect in 5 years' time, we'll still be talking about net spend because
people understand more. I think there's more City fans understand it, probably, but there's still a lot of fans who don't get it. And when people talk about net spend, it's ridiculous because you're not even comparing like with like. People think they are. Transfer fees of players coming in are amortized over the length of the contract, be that 3, 4, 5 years. Transfer fees going out are offset against the value of the player in the balance sheet. So you may think you've not done very well on a player, but actually you've made a profit. If you sell someone 4 years into a 5-year contract, you may well have made a profit on them.
Yeah.
But people see you bring in £100 million player, you sell a £10 million player, and they say that's a £90 million net spend. Yeah. But actually, it's nothing like that.
Yeah, and finally on that, actually, people ignore the agents' fees because, when you talk about net spend, why don't you include the agents' fees? Because some clubs pay a heck of a lot more. I think United and Liverpool play a heck of a lot more than some other clubs on agents' fees. I think the rumour was United paid 20 million for Pogba to his agent.
I mean, yes, I think agent fees, if a one-off fee for a transfer, will be added to the value of that player in the balance sheet. Or I think if it's a regular agent's fee, it will go through as an expense. But to give an analogy, if you're earning £50,000 a year and you buy a £200,000 house, people would say your net spend is £150,000. How can you afford that? Well, actually, you pay for your house via a mortgage.
Yeah.
So that mortgage might cost you 10,000 a year.
These things are affordable.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, but you can't think about it in terms of, your salary. You get 50,000 coming in. You're buying a house for 200,000. That's not your net spend.
Yeah. And I think the final word I'll say on this is Mr. Klopp, Jurgen Klopp. Same as with the Cass situation when he opened his mouth about that. He doesn't understand FFP, doesn't understand finances. Maybe because he's in the same city as Kieran Maguire, he can go to night school or night university and take some of Kieran's classes so that he can actually understand a little bit more about finances and not talk about other clubs. Keep it in-house. Talk about your own clubs. You've done really well, Jurgen, and what you won and everything else. Yeah. Don't spoil it by talking about other clubs.
It's important it is important to make the point finally that City and Liverpool are spending from the same pot. We do not get extra additional funding from Sheikh Mansour. You can look at the accounts. There's a statement called changes in equity. If he's putting money in, there's money going in there. If you look at the cash flow statement, if he's putting money in, there's an entry in that cash flow statement. He is not putting money in. We are spending from our own resources.
Fantastic, Colin. Thank you so much once again for explaining, going a little bit deeper into the finances, but keeping it in an understandable way for us